Okay, guys. So please don't forget to turn your cameras on in order to start. Maybe we're gonna wait 3 minutes until it's 8:05 to see if somebody else joins, to give everyone a chance. Okay.
I can listen to you.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't my microphone out. So I was saying, today and this week, we're gonna start with the speaking section of the TOEFL test. We're gonna cover this week specifically, we're gonna be working on only one of the questions in the speaking section, but eventually we'll be finishing the 4. So as for the speaking section goes, in terms of time, it's the shortest section. It's only gonna last 20 minutes. Okay, so in terms of time, it's gonna go by very quickly. And even, considering the fact that you're gonna spend most of this time speaking, you won't even realize when it's over. So it's gonna last 20 minutes. And as for the score goes, as all of the other sections, this is over 30 points. Okay, the speaking section is over 30 points. Now, in this speaking section, you will have 4 different types of questions. 4 questions, each one is different than the other. Among these 4, they could be organized in independent questions and integrated questions. This is how the ETS classifies the questions. The first of the 4 questions is the only independent question, and all of the other ones are integrated. But what does this mean? Basically, independent, as the name says, it means that it doesn't depend on anything else, right? So in this case, your response, what you say when you're speaking in the independent question, is going to be entirely about you, entirely about your opinions, your ideas, your thoughts, your life, and it doesn't depend on anything. You can say whatever you want to say. But on the integrated questions, which are question 2, 3, and 4, you guys will have to be summarizing something. So this won't depend on you anymore, but instead you will have to summarize something that they give you. So it could be a conversation, it could be an art, it could be a lecture, it could be both, but you need to summarize something that is given to you, something that you read, something that you hear. Okay? So that is the difference. Independent tasks and integrated tasks. And it will be the same for the writing section. Okay? Now, this week we said we're going to start working on task number 1, which is the independent question. Okay? We're going to be doing that one today and this week. Honestly, we have plenty of time to work on that, so we're going to take it slow. Now, before we look at the independent task, this is a summary of the rubrics that the TOEFL, that the ETS uses to evaluate your speaking responses. So basically, when they are looking at your responses, when they are grading your responses, they're going to look at 3 big things. The first one is topic development. Okay, this has to do with what you say. So that means when you're answering the question, does it make sense? What you're saying, like, is it nonsense? Does it make sense? Is it coherent? Are you actually answering the question they asked? Or are you going off topic, talking about something else? Is it concise, or are you being redundant and repeating the same idea over and over again? Are you managing your time correctly? Maybe you run out of time. Maybe you're spending too much time in something that is not so relevant. So how are you using your time? How are you managing it? Other thing that they look at is how much you're supporting and developing your response. So let's say you say, I like pizza. Okay. And then you have to support what you're saying, right? You have to justify what you're saying. So how developed, how deep your response is? How much support are you giving to your response? Are you giving enough details? Are you being specific? Are you giving good examples? Are you just properly? So that it means basically the depth of your response. Okay? And obviously they want something that flows well, that flows easily. So the ideas that you have, are they connected? Are they properly connected? Are you using enough connectors, transition words, linking words? Are your ideas progressing in a natural way, or are you maybe forcing too much? Yes. Do you have a good structure, or are you organizing your ideas like all over the place? So that is what they look at. That is what they look at when they're considering topic development. Okay. So basically, what you say, how well connected it is, how well supported it is, whether it makes sense, whether you're answering the question and you're fulfilling what they're asking you to do, and timing. Okay. Second thing they look at is delivery, which means how you speak. Okay, this is technically how you speak. So it obviously has to do with being fluent. So with pronouncing correctly the words, and I don't mean not having an accent, because everyone does, everyone has an accent, that's normal. But are you pronouncing the words in a way that it's easy to understand, that it's intelligible, that anyone could understand? Anyone that speaks English should be able to understand what you're saying. Are you intonating the words, and are you connecting the meaning of what you're saying with the way that you're saying it? Are you stressing some words to show how relevant some of them are? Are you articulating the words correctly? And how fluent are you? Are you making a lot of pauses maybe? Are you stopping too much to think? Are you like, all the time? Maybe you're using too many filler words, like, maybe you're using like a little bit too much. How much your speech flows, That's delivery, how you speak, how clear you speak, how fluent you are. And that's it. That's the library. And third one, very important too, is language use. Basically, how well you can use the language. That's what it means. That has to do with vocabulary. So are you showing the vocabulary of a basic student? So are you just using basic words, the ones that you learn in A1 level? Or maybe you're using more complex words, more advanced words. So what's your range, the range of your vocabulary? How many words can you use? And how appropriate are the words that you're using? Are they appropriate to the response? Are they academic enough? Are they, I don't know, are they appropriate to the context of your response, to the topic that you're talking about? So that is basically vocabulary. And grammar obviously plays an important role too. So are you making maybe too many grammar mistakes, or are you making the same grammar mistake over and over again? Are you always struggling with the same grammar point? Are you showing enough grammar variety? That means, are you using maybe somehow complex structures? Are you showing that you have the grammar of an advanced student or a basic one, or maybe an intermediate one? So that is basically what the things that you need to be careful with, the things that you need to do in order to have a top score. Okay, I didn't make this up, I didn't just took some things out of nowhere and put them together. You can find actually the real rubrics on the ETS website. If you search for TOEFL speaking rubrics, you can find both the rubrics for the independent and the integrated questions here. Okay, and this is by the official ETS website. I'm sending you the link in case you want to check it out. Now, of course, this is way longer. That was the summarized version. But if you got some time, then you can take a look at this. Okay. Now, basically, they won't grade your responses from 0 to 30, okay, which is maybe what your guys are imagining when I told you that the speaking section is over 30. They do some sort of conversion. They are first gonna score each response on a scale of 0 to 4. They're gonna grade you from 0 to 4. They're gonna then get the average of your 4 questions, and then that's gonna be converted into your actual score, right, which is over 30. So in order to get the maximum score, in order to get a 4 in the independent task, this is what you guys need, okay? This is a general description of it. David, maybe, could you please read this part? David, you there? Can you hear me? Hello, David? Can you guys hear me? Yes, okay. Maybe David's having some. Okay, maybe let's ask Ivan, could you please read what I just highlighted? The general description of a fourth score.
Okay. The response fulfills the demands of the task with at most minor lapses in completeness. It's highly intelligible and exhibits sustained coherent discourse. A response at this level is characterized by all of the following.
Okay, thanks, Ivan. So basically, that's what we said, right? To get a 4, you need to fulfill the demands of the task. What are the demands of the task? First of all, you need to answer the question, right? If they ask you, do you prefer pizza or sushi? You cannot be in between and tell me, well, I prefer pizza sometimes, but in some occasions I prefer sushi, or I think both are okay. I don't like either. You need to answer it directly, right? You need to fulfill and answer the question. What's another demand of the task? The time, right? If they say that you have 45 seconds to answer, and you need to use those 45 seconds to answer the question. You cannot use more because technically you couldn't, right? Even if you wanted. They're gonna stop recording after the 45 seconds are over. But you don't need to show, you need to try to avoid showing that you ran out of time. So you can never run out of time, or maybe if you have 45 seconds and you only use like 30 and then you leave the 15 seconds left hanging, then you're not fulfilling the time they gave you, right? So basically that's fulfilling the demands of the task. Then they say with at most minor lapses in completeness. That means that your answer should be complete. Like it could have some minor lapses. So there could be maybe some missing information, but it has to be minor, right? In general, your response should be complete. And in order to be complete, it needs to have enough details, enough support, enough ideas. It needs to be well developed, basically, right? Then they say it is highly intelligible, which basically means it's easy to understand, not in the content way, but you can basically understand what the person is saying, what the candidate is saying. So that's what I told you about delivery, right? It should be easy to understand, easy to follow. It shouldn't be tiring. It should be, maybe you need to speak with a little enthusiasm so that the other person feels that vibe, right? It exhibits sustained, coherent discourse. So you cannot talk nonsense, right? You need to actually answer the question, and your ideas need to be coherent to the topic. And it has to be sustained, well developed. And then they explain more specifically what they want for each category, but we already explained that, right? But just remember, this is the official rubrics they use for the independent in the first page and for the integrated in the second one. So if you got some time, you can take a time to read. You could actually even get a 0. You could get a 0 if the speaker makes no attempt to respond, so if you don't say anything, or if the response is unrelated to the topic. So you need to be really careful when reading the question, really careful with understanding the question well, because it happens sometimes that you read a question and you understand something else. Since you're nervous, you're a little rushed. So you need to actually be careful when reading the question, because if you misunderstand the question and then you talk about something else, then you could even get a 0, even if you had a great response. So is that okay so far? Do you guys have any questions about that? No questions?
What is that time for each question?
Okay, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get right on. Any other question though? No questions? Okay, guys. So I want to show you a sample so that you see how it actually will be on your test day. Give me a sec. I think I have it on my YouTube. Let's see. And there you will see the time and everything else. Here it is. Okay, guys. So let's watch this video. This is exactly how it will look like on your screen when you're taking the test. Okay, remember we're doing test number 1, right? So this is a sample of how it's gonna be.
Number 1. In this question, you will be asked to give your opinion about a familiar topic.
Okay.
In this question, you will be asked to give your opinion about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to prepare your response and 45 seconds to speak. State whether you agree or disagree with the following statement. Then explain your reasons using
Okay, sorry, the quality is too bad. Let me. Okay, sorry.
to prepare your response and 45 seconds to speak. State whether you agree or disagree with the following statement. Then explain your reasons, using specific details in your explanation. Learning through online courses is more effective than learning in the traditional classroom setting.
Begin to prepare your response after the beep. Begin speaking after the beep.
Okay, so that's basically how it's gonna be. You get the instructions first, which tell you you will be asked in this question to give your opinion about a familiar topic. Then they tell you the time. So how much time did you have for this question? You have 15 seconds to prepare your response first. So first they said, begin to prepare your response after the beep, right? And then you heard a beep, and then the clock starts counting down, right? 15, 14, 13. So you have those 15 seconds to prepare your response, to think about what you're gonna say, to take a few notes if you want. As you could see, 15 seconds was almost nothing, right? And then you have to start speaking. And they said, begin speaking after the beep. You hear another beep, the second one, and you need to already start speaking. And you need to be answering the question they asked, right? And you have 45 seconds to do that. So just to summarize, they give you the instructions. They read the question for you, but you can also see it on your screen. After you hear the question, you get 15 seconds to prepare and 45 seconds to speak. That is how this question works, okay? Do you have any questions about that, the format? And it will look exactly like this, this is very similar to how it's gonna be. You have the volume there, you have the menu, and next. Okay, guys, let's go back. Okay. Now, we're gonna take some time to hear a couple of responses, okay? So that we can analyze them and you will tell me what you think about them and we'll see. By the way, these are top score responses, okay? So we're gonna hear a sample response for this one here. It says, or maybe, Cynthia, could you please read the question?
Do you think it's a good idea for children to help their parents with household chores as soon as they are old enough? Use the tasks and examples in your response.
Great, thanks, Cynthia. Now, the question itself here, it's here, right? It says, do you think it's a good idea for children to help their parents with household chores as soon as they're old enough? So the question is, do you think that this is a good idea? Now, what do you guys think? What are your possible ways to answer this question? You need to give your opinion, right? But it doesn't have to be necessarily your opinion. You can just make something up, it's fine. So what are some possible ways to answer this question? You have only two to give you a clue. What is the first way that you could answer? The first answer you could have.
We agree that it's a good idea for children to help their parents with household chores.
Exactly. So the first way to answer this question would be to say, yes, I think it's a good idea. Right? Yes, I think it's a good idea. And the second way to answer would be,
Maybe the opposite, like I don't think.
exactly. Those are the only two options that you guys have. Okay? These are the only two valid responses. I mean, it would be a lie if I told you you can actually say whatever you want. You know, you can't. You have to say, I think it's a good idea or I don't think it's a good idea. One of the two. You can never be in between. You can never waver between the options and be like, well, I think that it depends. It depends on their age. Okay, that's a very valid response. You know, if you were having a conversation and you really don't have a strong opinion about this, because I think it depends on the age, or I think it depends on the culture. I think it depends on how their parents choose to raise their children, or I think that it has positive and negative effects on the children, or I think this has advantages and disadvantages. You cannot do that, or you cannot say, well, I don't really have an opinion about this, or I wouldn't do any of these. You can never do something like that. You only have two options. There are only two valid responses to have a good score and to answer the question directly. Yes, I think it's a good idea, or no, I don't think it's a good idea. There's nothing else that you could say, okay? And this goes for everything because there are different types of questions. Hang on, I think I have it here. It doesn't really matter what type of question you get because there are many types. For example, I can tell you, do you think it's a good idea or not? Sometimes you have, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? And they tell you, children should help their parents with household chores. Same thing there. You don't have more options than saying, I agree that children should do household chores, or I disagree. Or if you have something like, do you prefer taking the bus or a cab or a taxi? Okay, if you have this question, the only two options are gonna be, I prefer taking the bus 100% of the time, no matter the circumstance. I always prefer taking the bus, or I totally prefer taking a taxi, you know, all the time, 100%. So you don't have an option in between. You always have two options. You could have three too. Maybe you have something like, I don't know, which of the following do you think is better for children, let's say? And then you have three options. Maybe you have option one, technology. Option two, learning languages. So let's see. Or option three, practicing sports. Okay, so do you think it's better for children to learn to use technology, to learn languages, or to practice sports? So in this case, you have three options. But the only answer choices the only possible answers you could have are one, I think that it's better for children to learn to use technology, or two, I think that it's better for them to learn a language, or third, I think that it's better for them to practice sports. And I know that if we actually think about it and we're trying to do the right thing, there's not a reason why children have to choose, right? One answer could be, well, I think that they could do the three of them. The three of them are equally important for children. That could be an answer in real life, but not for the TOEFL test. In the TOEFL test, you need to make sure that you always choose one of the options. So you need to say, you need to focus only on technology, only on languages, or only on sports. Okay? Is that okay so far? Do you have any questions about what we just said? No? Okay, guys. So remember again, the question says, do you think it's a good idea for children to help their parents with household chores as soon as they are old enough? Use details and examples in your response. We're gonna listen to the sample response now, and then we'll analyze it. Okay, please pay attention. Don't take any notes, okay? Just pay attention.
I think it's a great idea for kids to do household chores as soon as they're old enough. First of all, this can teach children skill in life. For instance, I was responsible for breakfast for my little brother the day before I like meals always going out. Second, together, and this gives them a chance to bond, work on things, just or cooking food. They can chat, and the kids might open up about what's going on in their lives.
Okay, guys. So what do you think about that sample response? It seems a little bit unrealistic, right? That was 45 seconds, but the speaker didn't even make a pause for once, right? It was obviously a prepared response, and it was prepared in more than 15 seconds, okay? So first of all, I'd like to say that you don't have to worry, you don't have to have something like this. I didn't have something like this, and I got a really good score. So you don't really need something perfect to have a perfect score, okay? Because not even native speakers speak like that, you know. If you ask them a question like that, maybe they're gonna think a bit, maybe they'll make some mistakes, they won't use the perfect vocabulary either. That's fine, you know, you don't necessarily have to have something like that. But we're listening to it and we're analyzing that response so that we maybe extract some good tips out of that. Okay, so let's take a look at the transcript for that response. First of all, the question, remember the question, right? Is it a good idea for children to do household chores? As you can see here in the transcript, the first sentence, what is this first sentence doing? When he says, I think it's a great idea for kids to do household chores as soon as they are old enough. What is this? That is basically the answer to the question, right? Because the question was, do you think it's a good idea for children to help their parents do household chores as soon as they're old enough? That was the question. So in the first sentence, which we're going to call the introduction to the response, the speaker, he was answering the question. How direct is he answering the question? How direct is his answer? Pretty direct, isn't it? Because first of all, the question was, do you think it's a good idea? That was the question, right? At the end of the day, do you think it's a good idea that this and that? So to answer this question, the most direct way in which you could answer it is by saying I think, because it's the same verb, right? Do you think? I think. Do you think? Yes, I think. It's the same verb, so it's very direct in that way. Second thing, do you think it's a good idea? And he's saying, I think it's a great idea. So not only he's saying a good idea, but he's even making it stronger. Remember, I told you need to be very strong when you're answering the question. It needs to be really strong. Like you're super sure about what you're saying. So it is different if I say, yes, I would say that it's a good idea for kids to do household chores. Then if I say something like, I think it's a fantastic idea for kids to do household chores, right? Or if I say, I think it's an awesome idea, or I think it's the best idea that kids do household chores. So when I'm using those adjectives, I'm making it stronger. I could even use an adverb, right? And say, I think it's totally a great idea for kids to do household chores. And it isn't just what I'm saying, but the way that I'm saying it, right? Because I'm not saying, I think it's a great idea for kids. I'm saying, I think it's a fantastic, I'm emphasizing, stressing that word, you know? So that is something that I really liked about his introduction. First of all, that it's direct. He's using the same verb as in the question. And even though I usually, as a rule, I usually tell my students not to say I think because it's not too short. In this case, it's great because that is the verb that was used in the question. So that is going to be my first tip. When you're answering the question, try to use the same verb. If they ask, do you agree or disagree that kids do household chores? Then tell me, I agree or I disagree. Use the same verb. I agree that kids should do household chores. Or I don't think, or I don't agree, or I don't disagree that kids do household chores. So use the same verb. If they ask you, do you prefer pizza or sushi? You need to say, I prefer pizza, or I totally prefer pizza. Okay? So that'll be my first tip. In the first sentence, you're going to have an introduction when you answer the question directly. Of course, you can paraphrase it a bit, and you can summarize it a little bit. So in this case, he's not using exactly the same words, right? Instead of children, he's saying kids. Instead of kids help their children, children help their parents, he's just saying kids to do, so he's shortening the response. He could even maybe leave this part out. But at the end of the day, he's answering the question directly, right? In the first sentence. Is that okay so far? You will have to do the exact same thing. In your first sentence, you'll have to have an introduction where you answer the question directly. Is it okay so far? Any questions? Okay, what about the second sentence? He says, first of all, this can teach children some really valuable skills that will come in handy later in life. What is that?
The first reason.
So remember, in the rubrics we read, one of them was sustained discourse, right? So you need to justify what you're saying. If you're saying that it's a good idea, you need to tell me why. That means you need to give me reasons why you think that way, why you feel or what your opinion is like that. So he is doing that. He's supporting his idea with one reason in the first. So he says the reason why it's a great idea is because this can teach children valuable skills that will come in handy later in life. Another thing I like about this reason is that it's direct, right? So there's no way that you can get lost here. You understand it? It's simple. It's not nothing complicated. It's direct. It's easy to understand. It's straightforward. And he's not explaining it much, is he? He's not explaining anything he said in his reason. Why? Because it will be a little bit redundant to explain it, given that he is gonna use an example to explain it more. So in the second part, when he says, for instance, I was responsible for cooking breakfast for my little brother, all of that is an example. For instance means for example. So instead of explaining his reason, which is what most students do, the mistakes that most students make, he is using an example to explain his reason, right? That is the best way that you can explain your reason. Use an example. Now, what do I like about this example? It is well connected, it has good transitions. For instance, as a result, he could have said so, but he said as a result, which is better. Maybe he could have used a better one here, but it's well connected. Second thing, it is very detailed. Where are the details? What are the details in this example? When he says, my little brother, that's a detail, right? When he says breakfast, that's a detail. When he says every day before we went to school, that's a detail, right? When he says, when I went away to college, that's another detail. Why is that? What are those details? Because he could have easily just said, for instance, my parents taught me to cook, and that was helpful later in life. That could be an example, right? But is that a detailed example? Is he presenting enough details? No, right? If he just said, for instance, I learned to cook when I was a kid, and that was really helpful. So no details in there. You need to be specific, right? So he's using specific details that make his example way stronger than if he didn't have those details. So those are the two things. First, it's well connected with good transitions. Second, it is really detailed, specific. And third thing I really like is that the fact that this is a personal experience gives him the chance to use good grammar. Because remember, we have to have vocabulary, we have to have grammar too, right? It's not only the way you speak it, what you say, the content. But he has good grammar as well. He's using more than one tense. So when we were, I was, when I went away, usually the best way to show grammar variety is using compound sentences and using more than one tense. And he's doing that. He has one compound sentence, he has more than one tense. Maybe he could have even used a conditional at the end and said something like, if my parents, or maybe if I hadn't helped my parents with cooking as a kid, maybe I wouldn't be so healthy now, or I would have some problems. I would have some health problems, right? Or maybe I would have struggled in college. Many things you could say. Struggled in college, right? So let's imagine that he added this sentence at the end as a conclusion for his example. If he says, so if I hadn't helped my parents with cooking as a kid, maybe I would have struggled in college, right? So not only does that serve like a closing idea, but it's also good for grammar because it's a third condition. So basically, his example has good details, it's well connected, it has good grammar. And one more thing that I want to say about his example is that it is really coherent to his reason, right? It illustrates it perfectly. It isn't like off topic or something, because his reason was that children learn valuable skills that are later helpful, right? That later come in handy. So he is showing how when he was a kid, he learned a valuable skill, which was cooking, that later helped him in college, right? To eat healthy food. So as you can see, everything's connected, everything's clear, it's detailed, and that's how you get a good score, not really having so much information, but having the necessary information. Is that okay so far? Do you guys have any questions about what we're saying? No? Okay. So remember I told you those 45 seconds felt like way more. Maybe you thought that it was like 60 seconds because he really said a lot. He used the time, he used exactly the 45 seconds he had. He didn't waste any of his time in like pauses or anything. But being more realistic, you're obviously gonna think a little bit. So you're probably not gonna have as much information as he did. So what's good for us, you don't actually have to have everything that he had. He has another reason, right? He says, secondly, parents and children can do household chores together and this gives them a chance to bond. He has another reason and more explanation, although it's obviously shorter and it's simpler than the first one, but you don't need to have that, okay? All you need to have a good score is the first part, the one that I just circled. Okay, so you basically just need your opinion, which is your introduction, your answer to the question. You need one reason that explains your opinion, and you need one example that illustrates your idea and that is detailed. Okay, the other part is optional. Is this okay so far? Do you have any questions about this response? Questions? Okay, we're gonna listen to one more sample response. Perhaps, Evelyn, you there? Why are you guys with your cameras off? Are you all there? Okay, Evelyn, I think you're not there, right? Are you?
Can you hear me?
If
Do you agree or disagree with the following sentence? We can learn a lot from making mistakes.
Okay, thank you so much, David. I see that now it's working. Great, so we're gonna listen to a sample response for this. Okay, we can learn a lot from making mistakes, agree or disagree. Let's hear it. It's a little bit more realistic than the other one, okay? We're gonna see.
I totally agree that we can learn a lot from making mistakes. First of all, we always remember how our past mistakes made us feel, and since they usually make us feel really terrible, we try to avoid repeating them so we don't feel that way again. We also take deliberate action to avoid it. For instance, last year before my big science midterm, I made the mistake of playing video games all day long. As a result, of course, I failed the test and I felt miserable. But I learned from that it's very important to study and to prepare for tests. So the next year, during exam season, I buckled down, I studied, and I learned a lot.
Okay. So that's another example of a response. And basically it has the same things we already talked about. So as you can see, he has his introduction, where he directly answers the question using the same verb, maybe paraphrasing a little bit, although he doesn't paraphrase, right? He could have paraphrased, maybe that would some points for vocabulary, although it's not necessary. So he has his introduction. I totally agree. It's a strong, I totally agree that we can learn a lot from making mistakes, right? That's enough for the intro, very quickly. He has good transitions. He has his reason. And in this case, since he only has one reason, he made it a little bit longer. So he explained it more than in the previous one, right? Honestly, I don't recommend that. I wouldn't do that. I would try to summarize it a bit more and say something like, first of all, our past mistakes make us feel really terrible and we try to avoid repeating them, right? That would have been enough. But he did explain it, it's fine. And then he had his example, right? And his example basically has the same things as we did before. So it's very specific. Last year, before my science midterm, I made this mistake of playing video games. I felt this way. I learned from that. And next year, I buckled down, I studied and learned a lot. So it's a specific, right? He could have said, for instance, the other day I made a mistake and I felt bad, so I didn't do it again. That's an example, but it's not specific, right? You need to be specific about it. So that's it. As you can see, he doesn't have a second idea, he doesn't have a second reason or a second example, and he doesn't have a conclusion. So as I was telling you, this is all you need. Your introduction, your reason, and your example. Okay, guys, that's what you're gonna be doing in this question. Do you have any ideas so far? Sorry, do you have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask, or maybe anything you want to add? No questions? Okay. Now remember I told you the topics here are always gonna be everyday topics. So the questions that you get are never gonna be too hard to answer. Okay, they are always related to everyday conversations that you could have with a friend. So nothing too technical or too complicated. As you can see on my screen, the majority of times, like 75% of the time, you get something related to work or education. This is the most common type of question about work or high school or college life. So it's good to have vocabulary about these things, right? It's good to have words like colleague, coworker, boss, classmate, I don't know, group project, grades. Those words related to work and education are really important, okay? Because you're gonna need them here. Then they ask you about relationships. So relationships with your parents, with your family members, with your friends, romantic relationships. So it's good to have vocabulary related to those topics as well. They ask you sometimes about recreation and travel. So things that you do for fun, maybe, I don't know, like playing video games or watching TV or watching movies or TV shows, books, traveling and cultures. They ask about that a lot. Lifestyle and health, which is basically related to food, to diets, to working out, to, I don't know, like lifestyle choices. And then obviously sometimes, not always though, they ask about technology. So the effects of technology, if you prefer using social media or not, things like that, electronic devices, finance decisions, but very simple finance decisions. You know, they're not gonna ask you about like the stock market. They will ask you things like, do you think it's a good idea to save or do you spend everything that you earn? Their environment or global issues like pollution, violence, things like that. And very rarely they ask you about social or political issues. But again, this isn't something specific, right? This is something very general. Like maybe do you think there should be a law against throwing garbage, maybe, or maybe a political issue like do you think that the government should rule for more than 4 years or not? Things like that. So it's good to have vocabulary for these topics. And I'm actually going to be sending you a document with vocabulary for these topics so that you can check it out. Okay? Now, I know that we haven't done much today, but I'm taking it, as I said in the beginning, we're going to be taking this first speaking task slowly because we actually have plenty of time to work in it. We have the entire week until Friday. So it's 4 classes only for this question. That's the way that the structure of the course goes. So we'll have enough time to practice, to go. We have to go still. We need to look at the template. I need to give you some tips. I need to hear you speak and give you some feedback. So we have plenty of time. Don't worry too much. Okay, but so far, how do you feel? Do you have any questions about what we did today? It was a lot of theory, right? It was just theory. But do you have any questions, maybe? No questions? Okay, guys. Then thank you so much for joining. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Don't forget to answer the daily survey, to fill it out, please, before you go. And see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you so much, teacher.
Bye, teacher.
Thank you.
Bye, teacher.
Bye, teacher.
See you tomorrow.
Mm.